Welcome to the largest and by far the most important international airport in all of Australia, that being Sydney. Today, I'm going to be flying on Virgin Australia to the most popular international destinations that you can get to from here, that being Bali. When flying between the east coast of Australia and Denpasar, Bali, passengers have a wide selection of different airlines to choose from, such as the most popular choice Jetstar, the safest choice Qantas, or the more unique choice Batik Air. However, by far the least popular choice, certainly amongst the Australian carriers, is Virgin Australia, who operate generally once a day from all the major East Coast cities, in comparison to Jetstar, who can and often operate up to 4 times a day in Melbourne and 3 times a day in Sydney during the peak season. In saying this, my choice to fly with Virgin today was more on the matter of price above all, as I was unfortunately not going on holidays, unlike the last time I flew this route. Terminal 1 here at Sydney Airport is the primary terminal which serves all international traffic coming in or out of the country. Every so often, a domestic flight does operate here, such as QF33 to Perth and then Rome. However, it's not really a common sight outside of Qantas or Jetstar. The terminal check-in counters are laid out in letters starting from A on the north side and ending in K on the south side. Virgin Australia has a dynamic check-in area, meaning it isn't necessarily in the same place every time. However, in my experience, they most often use the kilo check-in counters, which was also the case for today. There are dedicated priority lanes for business class and high-tier velocity frequent flyer passengers, as well as the standard economy lane. Effective from September 1st, 2025, Indonesia has implemented a new declaration form which combines customs, immigration and biosecurity requirements, which must be filled out 48 hours prior to arrival and cannot be done in advance. Check-in this afternoon was rather slow, taking approximately 20 minutes to complete, as the entire complement of passengers were ahead of me. After my bag was sent on its way to Bali, and with my boarding pass in hand, up next was security. Security this afternoon, despite being run like a well-oiled machine, was rather on the slow side, taking approximately 15 minutes to pass through. Post-security is the usual duty-free shopping area filled with the usual luxury goods, including perfume, watches, alcohol, chocolates, skincare products, and more. However, in today's case, as the departure time was very close, I opted instead to ignore duty-free, focusing rather on getting to my gate in time. Virgin Australia at Sydney Airport operates out of 2 terminals. Terminal 2 is for their domestic operations, and of course, Terminal 1 is for their few international operations. In my experience, Virgin generally uses the western gates on PSC at Terminal 1, which are gates 50, 54, 56, 60, 61 and 63. These gates are amongst the furthest from the security checkpoint, taking approximately 10 to 15 minutes to walk to, depending on your walking speed. Upon arriving at today's gate, waiting on the apron is the aircraft about to take me to Indonesia, which today is a Boeing 737-800 registered as Victor Hotel Yankee India Romeo. Construction of this airframe was completed at Boeing's final assembly plant in Seattle, Washington in August of 2012. She was delivered brand new to Virgin in October of the same year, which makes this aircraft 13 years old. Boarding commenced shortly after I had arrived at Gate 54, starting firstly with business class passengers, and then followed by high-tier velocity frequent flyers and Economy X, and then in no real particular order for economy. Virgin Australia's 737-800s have 3 different configurations, depending on the aircraft's age. This particular aircraft has 176 seats in a technically 3-class configuration. There are 8 recliner business class seats in a 2-2 layout and 168 standard economy class seats in a 3-3 layout, whilst rows 3, 4, 5, 13 and 14 are sold as extra legroom economy X seats. This evening, I shall be seated in 5 Alpha on the left-hand side or port side of the aircraft. Virgin Australia has opted for the Collins Pinnacle Slimline seat for their Economy X product, which features 34 inches or 86 centimeters of pitch and 17.5 inches or 44.5 centimeters of width. There is a standard tray table that folds down and extends towards you. In the seat back pocket, you'll find a safety card, buy on board menu, a promotional AFL Grand Final card, and an air sickness bag. Above are individual reading lights, air vents, and a flight attendant call button. In between each trio of seats are 4 USB-A ports. Soon we commenced our pushback from Gate 54, 10 minutes behind our scheduled departure time.
Cabin crew arm doors and cross-check.
Welcome to your Virgin Australia flight. It's wonderful to have you aboard. Keeping you safe is our top priority. So before we take off, please give us your attention as we should immediately pull the mask down to get the oxygen flowing. Remove any face covering, then quickly place the oxygen mask over your nose and mouth and slip it around your waist. Clip together, then pull the strap to tighten. Once you're outside the aircraft, pull down on the red toggles to inflate, and for more air, blow into the mouthpieces.
We taxied to runway 16 right via Golf, Alpha and Alpha 1.
Yeah, Block 3065. Block 3065, Sydney Taipei. Block 3065, line up, runway 16 right. Line up, runway 16.
Cabin crew is at the takeoff.
Now please enjoy this unedited takeoff.
Block 3065, runway 16 right, clear to takeoff. Give a takeoff from my 165, Block 3065.
Once airborne, we continued south over Botany Bay before spinning around and setting up a northwesterly course for Denpasar. Flight time today is 6 hours and 50 minutes, covering a distance of 3,047 miles or 4,903 kilometers, cruising at 36,000 feet. During our initial climb out of Sydney, on the left-hand side was the Kurnell Peninsula, where Sydney's old desalination plant used to be. Virgin Australia offers Wi-Fi on board their flights. However, it is not free for economy class, starting at $9.75 for 30 minutes. They do, however, have an entertainment app, which is filled with a selection of the latest movies, TV shows, podcasts, and music. Unfortunately, there is no moving map on this app. Continuing north out of Sydney, we flew directly over the Princess Highway, which is one section of Highway 1, Australia's longest road, that connects the entire country in a giant loop. This was then followed by the lights of the western suburbs of Sydney, which pierced through the low layer of cloud, which it was rather pretty. As Virgin Australia is not a full-service airline, there are no meals served on board. However, instead, there is an onboard menu filled with a selection of different food items and goodies. Please pause the video at any time to review the menu items in more detail. With my order placed and food on its way, I glanced outside and saw the bright lights of the regional New South Wales town of Orange, around 200 kilometres west of Sydney. Soon the cabin crew returned to my seat, and I was handed dinner, which tonight I opted for a can of peach gin and soda, as well as the spinach and ricotta tortellini pasta. I found the meal itself to have a very heavy garlic flavour, and I couldn't really taste the ricotta. However, despite this, I did actually quite like the pasta, as I am a big fan of garlic. Continuing over the desolate outback of the Northern Territory, the ground was brilliantly lit up by the raging red bushfires below, which looked like we were flying straight over hell. As I decided to catch a quick 90-minute power nap, when I woke up, outside were a sea of fishing boat lights that littered the Indian Ocean like stars in the sky. On board the aircraft are 3 bathrooms, one at the front behind the cockpit for business class, and 2 at the rear for economy. Inside is everything you would typically come to expect for this airline and aircraft type, including a baby changing station and the Virgin Brandon hand soap. Soon we commenced our descent into Denpasar. Unfortunately, due to the time of day, there was absolutely nothing to be seen outside, excluding for the split scimitar winglet. This was of course until we descended below 10,000 feet, and the captain switched on the landing lights, which brilliantly lit up the engine nacelles and the classic red VA engine stripe. No matter what side of the aircraft you sit on, you will always end up seeing great views of the island of Bali on landing. However, generally speaking, I recommend sitting on the left-hand side of the aircraft, as you will either see the Garuda statue on landing from the east, or the city itself when flying in from the west. Now please enjoy this unedited landing. After landing, we taxied back to the terminal via November 3 and November. We pulled into gate 15 4 minutes ahead of our scheduled arrival time. Stepping off the aircraft, I thanked the great crew for the flight before turning my attention away from Virgin and towards entering Indonesia and somehow getting to my hotel. So, I just flew with Virgin Australia between Sydney and Denpasar. What are my thoughts? Well, as always, let's start from the beginning. Check-in today was rather slow, as I was the last passenger to check in. However, as there were approximately 30 groups in front of me, and with an average of 2-minute check-in time, it wasn't that long. Security and immigration today were fairly typical for Sydney, taking not super long, but definitely not quick either. As Sydney is currently being upgraded, security had half their usual machines, which is definitely what caused the delay. On board, the seat was fairly standard for Virgin Australia. I personally prefer these older seats rather than the newer ones, which have better padding and elevated comfort. The food today was pretty good. However, like I mentioned earlier, the meal is definitely not for everyone, as the garlic taste was rather heavy. If you're sensitive to it, I'd recommend you to buy something else instead. The service was fairly typical for what I've experienced over the years. Virgin Australia's staff are very friendly, and they find the right balance between being cheerful, talkative, and fun, without sacrificing professionalism and efficiency. And finally, I paid $500 for this one-way choice fare, which I thought was fair and reasonable considering what I got. So, would I recommend you to take this flight? Well, yes, absolutely. I found Virgin's service today to be near identical to their domestic flights, which is generally a good thing when it comes to consistency. However, this could be a downside for some passengers, since Virgin is not a full-service airline. And unlike Qantas, Virgin does not offer complimentary food or checked bags. But in saying that, Virgin also isn't a low-cost carrier either, as they offer more legroom than low-cost carrier Jetstar and provide entertainment, which makes for a much more enjoyable flight experience. So, I will definitely fly with them again. However, next time, I'm going to try the red-eye back to Australia. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure you check out my other videos if you would like to see more. And I have said this before, but I now have a Discord server. Feel free to join. The link can be found at the top of the description. And as always, feel free to press the notification button too, as it will let you know whenever I upload, which during this year's Christmas special happens every Tuesday and Friday at 8 PM and every Sunday at 5 PM Sydney time. And I hope to see you all again in the next one. See you later.